Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Hello, adventurers. Today we're back with another one of my editorials, for lack of a better term, and that is what I call the playlist, so we'll go with that. And I want to look at the classes that don't perfectly fall into either the category of martial or caster, but they are basically martials and what I'm going to call near martials. There are, of course, many ways to refer to them. Before we go too far, though, I need to define what I mean by a martial and which classes qualify. First, we have what I call full martials. These are classes which don't have spellcasting. They're meant to do damage with weapons or unarmed strikes or something of that nature, and they have either strength or dexterity as their primary ability score, so that they can lean into their highest chance to hit and crit with their weapons of choice. Then we have our casters. I lump into this anybody, any class that uses spell slots, including bounded casters. So I still think they're casters, even though something like the Magus might be very easily taken as a martial. They're kind of like the ultimate Gish class. They still don't fall into what I'm talking about today. No, these are the martial classes that don't have any spell casting, but also still don't use strength or dexterity as a primary ability score. There really aren't that many classes that fall into this category. A good example for this, for many people, is the Alchemist. The Alchemist is definitely a martial class in many ways. They're meant to be able to attack with weapons, whether that be bombs or something with poison attached to it, what have you. But intelligence is their primary ability score. And there is no weapon in the game that uses intelligence for attack rolls as the ability score modifier. Just strength and dexterity. Those are the only two by default outside of casters. And of course, casters, for spell attacks, if they make them, use their spellcasting ability score. And we even have kineticists, we'll get to them, that are different too. But these are the martials that are still relying on weapons that are supposed to use strength or dexterity, but they don't have that as their primary ability score. These classes are the alchemists, inventors, investigators, we'll get to it, rogues, we'll get to that one too, special note there. I'm specifically talking about the scoundrel and the mastermind, by the way, when I talk about rogues, and then thaumaturges. That's it. We can also look at a few unreleased classes that have been in playtesting. This would be your commanders and your runesmiths. About the kineticists, by the way, why I brought them up and why they don't fall into this is because kineticists, like spellcasters, use a different primary ability score for making their attack rolls, even though their attack rolls kind of live in more of a martially kind of setting, but it's not a weapon, it's not an unarmed strike, but it's kind of like a ranged unarmed strike almost. It's definitely not a spell. Anyway, kineticists are their own thing. Don't worry about them in this video. I named the classes that we are going to talk about in this video. So why am I bringing up these classes at all? And what are we even talking about? What's the point of this video? The question I'm trying to answer in this video is, do these, what I call near martials, hold up in the game of Pathfinder 2nd Edition when compared to the full martials, and in some small ways when compared to the casters as well? But really, how do they compare to the martials, and how do they fit into the game? So the first question would be, why wouldn't they fit into the game? They're a martial character. They can hit things and shoot things just like other martials can hit things and shoot things. True. They deal damage in combat the same way that martials do. True. But let's look at a level 1 inventor versus a level 1 barbarian, for instance. Let's say that I want to be an inventor that gets up in melee like the barbarian, big two-handed weapon like a barbarian. Okay, well, at level 1, the highest modifier I can get for my strength is going to be a +3, while the barbarians are going to get a +4. Doesn't sound like much, right? When you get right down to it, at level 1, my modifier for my attack rolls is going to be +6 with an inventor and +7 with a barbarian. Those are comparable, right? They are and they aren't. Yes, it doesn't sound like much. +1 here or there shouldn't drive that much, but some YouTubers out there, particularly the Rules Lawyer, thank you very much for popularizing this. It is true, though, that every +1 does matter, and the more games I run, the more encounters I get through, the more I see this to be true. That +1 matters, but why does it matter? Especially when we're just talking about a chance to hit. But that's just it. We're not talking about just a chance to hit. We're talking about a chance to hit and a chance to crit. Keep in mind that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, we have the degrees of success that are a plus 10, minus 10 system. For all those out there who are used to D&D 5e, yes, in that system, you only crit on a natural 20, generally speaking, which is kind of boring, but that is how it works. So suddenly, we'd only be talking about a slightly lower chance to hit rather than to hit and crit. But in Pathfinder, that +1 means not only did I lose 5% of my chance to hit, I lost 5% of my chance to critically hit an enemy. And that's the much larger swing here. Again, I feel like that needs to be qualified. Why is the chance to crit almost more punishing than the chance to hit? And keep in mind, this is doubling down on the bad here, right? The reason that the chance to crit matters so much is because Pathfinder 2nd Edition is very generous with its critical hits. What do I mean by that? I mean that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, when we're talking about our critical hits, we're talking about dealing not only double the dice rolls in damage, again, reference to D&D 5e, which critical hits can often be less punishing than regular hits. In Pathfinder, that's far less likely to happen, because again, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, we are going to roll our dice as normal, like a normal hit. We're going to add our modifiers like we would with a normal hit. Then we're going to double all of that, and that becomes our crit. And then, depending on what weapon you used or what abilities you have, you might be adding extra damage on top because you've got the deadly trait. Or, even better than that, you've got the fatal trait and all your dice become massive when you crit. Critical hits are the differentiator. They stand out in battle way more than a normal hit will. And if we're talking about a ranged character, the difference is even bigger. A gunslinger that crits can kill a minion in a single shot. A gunslinger that gets a hit, put a small bullet wound in somebody and they dropped a few drops of blood. It's a massive difference. So suddenly this 5% loss of the critical hit chance is very impactful in the game, even if that critical hit now just becomes a hit, because that hit is so much smaller. On top of this, we've got the resistances and how they work in the game. So resistances, whenever a creature takes damage, if it's of the same type, they reduce a certain number to that. So if I've got resistance 10 to piercing damage, and I'm hit by a gunslinger, again to use that example, they might only do 12 damage with a hit. Well, now I only took 2. But if they did 55 damage with a crit, this is not exaggerating for a decently low-level gunslinger with the right weapon, taking 10 away from that 55, I still got taken out for a huge chunk of damage. So the percentage of the damage taken out by resistance is massive against a hit, and hardly noticeable oftentimes against a critical hit. And then we're talking weakness, you might think, well, it swings both ways. And yes, percentage-wise it does, but somehow adding on an extra 5 from a weakness onto a hit or a crit kind of feel the same, so it's not as much of a differentiator here. So with critical hits being so impactful in the system, and with these near martials not being able to crit as often, isn't that a huge problem? Well, maybe it would be if that was entirely true, but it's not always. And so I want to get a little more into the numbers of all of this. First of all, we should talk about a couple of the classes I mentioned. The first of these is the Investigator. Yes, it is an intelligence-based martial. Okay, so it's going to have a lower chance to hit than Barbarians. Well, maybe not. Because if you devise a stratagem to make an attack stratagem against that creature, and you roll your stratagem dice, assuming you use it against that creature, whatever you rolled, you get to use your intelligence modifier rather than your dexterity modifier, or strength, but you're probably using dex because strength doesn't come up too much for them and the AC is useful. Anyway, you get to use that instead for your attack modifier. So suddenly, intelligence is your primary ability score for the attacks you make with your martial weapons, but only in that one case. And then we have the rogues I talked about. We have 2 rogue subclasses that allow you to take a non-martial ability score as your primary ability score. In this case, this is the Mastermind and the Scoundrel, allowing intelligence or charisma. And in that case, you could reduce your chance to hit by taking one of those. And there are great reasons to make one of those your primary ability score, but because it's just an option to use it, you can still keep Dex as your primary ability score and not take that hit. So those classes really aren't affected as much, which leaves us with just Inventor, Thaumaturge, and Alchemist. Okay, so these ones don't have a great way to augment their chance to hit the same way that the ones we talked about do. But I still don't think they're at a huge disadvantage, and here's why. At level 1, which is what we talked about so far, yes, my Inventor is only going to have a +3 to Strength, and the Barbarian's going to have a +4. But what about once we get to level 5? Well, at level 5, because of the way that ability score improvements work, the Barbarian's going to stay at a 4, but it's kind of like a 4.5 because you're partway to the next ability score increase, whereas Inventor's going to go from 3 to 4. So suddenly, from levels 5 through 9, the Inventor's at the same chance to hit as a Barbarian. And then again, the Inventor falls behind from 10 to 14 and catches back up for 15 to 19, and then falls finally back again at level 20. But it means that we can actually have an Inventor keep up from levels 5 to 9 and 15 to 19. Okay, so that's a good amount of playtime there. In fact, a lot of campaigns might just live in that 5 to 9 space, and all of this is unimportant because you don't fall behind full marshals at all as a near marshal. But in the case that we do fall behind, and we're running a campaign, say, from 1 to 20, or just low levels, so am I saying that you should never play a near marshal in those because you can't keep up with the same hit chance and crit chance? Not at all. In fact, if you watched my Inventor video, you probably see how much I love the Inventor. Near marshals are actually some of my favorite classes. Thaumaturge and Alchemist are also amazing in my mind. I'm sure I will come to love Investigators. I haven't got there yet. I'm sure I will, but I haven't quite got there. Rogues are amazing, though. Of course, they only kind of count in this category. In any case, generally speaking, they have other things that make them stand out from full marshals. In fact, oftentimes they make up for the fact that they don't have that little bit extra hit and crit chance with great control or great support abilities or great AoE. We look again at any of these. Let's look at the Alchemist, for instance. Their main attack is usually with bombs. Whether you're the bomber or not, you've got martial proficiency with bombs, and so you're going to be pretty good at throwing bombs. Well, bombs offer a lot of versatility. Not only do they do different types of damage, they've got splash damage, and if you're a bomber, they've got crazy splash damage, in fact, going wide and adding in your intelligence. So suddenly you're doing this kind of constant AoE, which is really good. And that's not even to mention with Alchemist the fact that they are making alchemical items better than anybody else in the game for free, which are huge. These are amazing support things, especially. Some can even be controlled. There are glue bombs and things you can use. Alchemical items are so versatile on their own that the Alchemist becomes capable of similar things to what some spellcasters can do from a versatility standpoint. Now, casters are generally still more versatile other than bounded ones, but full casters are still going to have more versatility. Still, alchemists run this lovely place right in the middle, where you become not truly a jack of all trades, but kind of in that vein, but you're close to mastering multiple. Inventors the same way. They've got some solid control tools. They've got some solid AoE tools, depending on what you choose to take. And you can go different routes, up close, further away, all these things. You can have your pet. You can do explosions that do AoE damage. Lots of cool things. Thaumaturges also, a lot of support in what they do, offering the ability to have others take advantage of the weakness they're putting onto enemies, but also making up for their chance to hit and crit by having nice, consistent damage. And this is also something we saw with Inventor. There's a consistency thanks to one of their class abilities, which is Overdrive, adding some consistent rage-like damage. And Thaumaturges have this, but even sometimes stronger, I would say, where they can just add or trigger weaknesses all the time. And this is a really strong ability. So they're making up for the fact that they don't have that little bit of hit and crit chance by usually being more versatile than a lot of our full marshals when you've got characters like the fighter and the barbarian and the ranger, all of these full marshals, I'd say even the monk, that while they have plenty of stuff to do on their own and options, they don't tend to have nearly as much versatility as the near marshals do. And so, yes, I think near marshals, by the numbers, do fall behind a bit when you're looking at straight single target damage at certain levels. Again, only at certain levels of play. But they more than make up for it, making themselves, in my mind, often the better choice for very tactically minded martial players. So when we get right down to it, the question of, do near marshals fall behind full marshals? In a very small way, from a straight numbers perspective, in this white room ideal situation of hits and crits, yes. In actual play in any sort of dungeon put together by any creative person, anything you pull out of adventures, no, they really don't. They keep up in many ways with both marshals and casters in very similar ways at the same time. I honestly think that some of the near martials are the most valuable characters to play. They're the ones I lean into when I'm just having fun and theorizing new builds. I tend to lean heavily into them on my own. If you could only see my path builder, you would know this. So please do not sleep on those near martials. I think the fact that they're offering something different, some other ability score to lean into, different options that the full martials don't get as strong of, that's really where you should live. And that's really what I think you should think about when you're considering near martials versus full martials and whether or not they keep up. I honestly think in many ways the near martials not only keep up, but step ahead. But that's just my thoughts. What do you think? Do you believe they're weaker than other classes? Maybe you think that I was way off base with my analysis of them at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, at all times, every time I open my mouth. Hey, let me know in the comments. And as always, adventure on.